We're just giving a few more minutes. In the meantime, just wanted to say that this is the first of our career development series. It will be the fourth Thursday of the month, except for Thanksgiving, in which it will be a different date, and also the Christmas holidays or the end of the year holidays. And so at 4 p.m. Pacific time, you can expect that every fourth Thursday, or if it's a holiday, then a little bit shifted, we will be having different topics. And today we're kicking off the year with the career development series on career planning in 2023, challenges and opportunities. And just as a background on the MIT Club of Northern California, it is the regional club of the MIT alumni in Northern California. And the mission of the club is to further the well-being of local MIT alumni by connecting them with each other and by fostering and continuing relationship with MIT. So we're really excited to have you all here, and our events are also open to those outside of the MIT Club of Northern California as well. But as members, you'll get to have lots of member benefits as well. All right, so why don't we get started? Thank you all for being here. It's been quite a year already, and certainly coming off of last year as well. I think there are certainly some new, not normals, but I mean, there's some new normals from the pandemic, but also just lots of changes. In some ways, the only constant is change. And so career planning is similar. I'm really excited to have with us here Yan Dang and also Eric Neerlich to join us today. My name is Wendy Zhang, and you probably have seen me host some other events for MIT. I'm really excited about this new career development series because I find that it's something that's deeply meaningful to others. And I've been a career coach for the MIT Sloan School of Management Sloan Fellows Program, and have just seen how it is something that, when I was earlier in my career, I wish I had known more about it and done more with it. So without further ado, I would like to invite Yan first, maybe, and then Eric, to share a little bit more about yourself and more of your background.
Thank you, Wendy. Nice to be here with everyone. My name is Yan Dang, and I'm an executive and life coach. And I really focus on working with women, build lasting confidence. So the other part of my background is I'm also a finance leader. So I was a global leader for many years, about 15 years in corporate America before I became a coach. And I've been through a lot of career transitions on both sides of them as a finance leader, working on restructurings and all those types of things. But myself, I've also been through two big restructurings, one when I was living in Singapore and another one just a couple of years ago during the pandemic. So happy to be here and share my experiences and the knowledge that I share with my clients. Thanks.
Thank you, Yan. And Eric?
Yeah, I'm Eric Neerlich, and I'm also an executive coach working with leaders to help them create more impact. I came to that after a 20-year career in technology, 10 years at a variety of startups doing engineering and product management, and then 10 years at Google doing business strategy and operations. I'll just share one little bit that I'm kind of on my fourth career at this point, because I actually started off as course 8 in physics, went on to grad school in physics before dropping out to begin as an engineer, and then switched to business strategy operations. Now I'm an executive coach. So I've navigated a few career transitions. I'll share a little bit of what I've learned over the years as we talk further.
All right, well, thank you so much. I always like to, you both have had such a color background, and there's just so many experiences you've had outside of coaching and just in being your own professional as well. There's many different alumni today who are joining us, and they're coming from different stages of their career, different stages of their life. And I know this is a very general question, but if someone randomly were to come to you and ask you about career planning, without knowing much about them, what would be the few top pieces of advice that you would give this person, regardless of their background? Eric, would you like to start?
Yeah, I guess I'll jump in. I have a few things I guess I would say. I mean, number one is, I guess, be intentional. Figure out what you're getting out of each job, and it's not just trying to, you know, get hired. It's not about just getting hired. It's like, what are you going to get out of it? So I like to split it up into, what are you learning? Like, what skills are you developing? Who are the people you're working with? And what impact are you having? And I'm always asking those questions to myself, like, what am I learning? Who am I working with? What impact am I having, to kind of judge myself? Is this job serving me? Am I getting something out of it? And then I guess the other thing I'll say is that try things out. Life is long. Like, your career could be 40, 50 years. So like, it's not about optimizing for like, how do I get the biggest title and the most compensation in the next year or two, 5 years after graduation? Oh my God, I'm falling behind. Somebody else is doing better than me. Your career is very long. Try things out, figure out what's going to work for you, especially in the early part of your career. It's about exploring and figuring out where you can offer the most impact. I have lots more to say, but I'll stop there and see what Jan has to share.
Thanks, Eric. I definitely want to underline the trying things out, right? Oftentimes we want to get it right and we're just looking for like the best thing and we think we're going to stay in it forever. But obviously, from what Eric shared and myself, I was also a CPA at the beginning, so very different too. And just like having the openness to other possibilities. But I think one exercise that could be really powerful, no matter where you are in your career, whether you're starting out or you've been in it for a long time, but really mining your brain for your best experiences, whether they're at work or in your personal life, to gather what it is that brings you energy and excites you and brings you meaning and purpose, right? I know those seem cliche, but really in the end, they're actually going to pay off if you do that. And also look at your worst experiences. What was happening there? Were you being micromanaged? What kind of environment was it? Was it super structured? You just want to get to know yourself better and, test things out and try to do something that is going to move you more closer to where you're going to be more energetic and excited about your career.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I love those different aspects where, it's very much a lot of times, I think when we think about careers, it kind of exists almost in that vacuum. It's like, oh, okay. And it has to be the best thing for me in this moment in time. And then I think to Eric's point, it really kind of, sometimes we ignore the whole, our careers are very long. They tend to be very long. For most people, they'll go until at least retirement age. And then for many MIT alums, I know, are still working beyond what's typical retirement age. And so when you look at their career from that perspective, I love what you're bringing up is that, it's not just about optimizing for that moment at that point in time, but when you stretch that out, even as someone who's, been working for 20 years, well, it's like, well, you probably still have a few decades to go still. And in that case, when you start putting things in that perspective, it becomes a lot more like, it's okay that I don't get everything that I want, or I feel like I'm falling behind in certain areas, because sounds like you'll make up for it later. But it sounds like it very much so at the core, it's really important to understand oneself or what they're really looking for. Both of you really talked about that quite a bit, and that's really important. I want to come back to that, but I do want to, since the topic of this conversation is about career planning in 2023 specifically, it's been a tough time for many in the second half of last year and this year so far. We hear about lots of layoffs, and I think many people have been laid off. I hear figures ranging from 11,000 to even like hundreds of thousands. But even the Bay Area is certainly like in the at least of 5 figures. And so, and basically job openings are also not as readily available as they have been in the past. And I also am seeing more of a trend of certain roles are not even necessarily advertised because there are just so many different candidates and so on who are who kind of get reached out to without without the job being posted. So I'm curious, how should individuals looking for career changes in this environment adjust their approach as compared to, say, a year ago or like 5 years ago?
I can start off with that. I think one of the big things, especially in this environment where you don't really know what industries are going to be hiring a lot or which ones are downsizing, it's really important to look at your skill set and look at it in terms of like what's transferable. You know, if you've got a specific really great skill that could be used in another industry and where you can contribute those skills, that's a really great way to leverage what you have and also, you know, put yourself into a new growth experience, a new industry that you might be excited about. I think another big thing too, Wendy, as you talked about it, right, your mind can also go to really negative places because you see the numbers, you see all the things. So it's also really important to protect your mindset and look for those opportunities and reach out to people and to have optimism, but also, you know what's happening in the industry, but without letting the news really take you down and really drain your energy. Because when you're out there interviewing, it's really your energy that's going to be really important because that's going to be more impactful than your words.
Yeah, I guess the first thing I would say is look at things from other people's perspective, especially hiring managers' perspectives. So if somebody's hiring, in some sense, every time they hire, it's a big risk. They're hiring somebody they don't know. So how can you make it a lower risk for them? How are you going to solve their problems? Because they're posting a position because they have work that needs to be done. So how can you show them that you not only can do the work, because everybody applying can probably do the work, but what can you do that makes you special, different from all the other applicants? So it's not enough to just be able to meet the bar of doing the work. You have to distinguish yourself from everybody else that's also applying. So just taking a moment to think about that, like what makes me different? What makes me special? What makes me stand out? And how can you convey that through your resume, through your interview, things like that? You mentioned maybe even people are trying to do career changes. Like this is one that comes up a lot. Like I'm going to change roles and I'll get hired in a new company. I'm like, it's just not going to happen. Because if you imagine a hiring manager, you're asking them to take on two risks. Because it's somebody new they don't know they're hiring and somebody that hasn't done the job before. That's really hard to convince them that you're going to be able to do that. You're increasing the amount of risk they're taking on. So in a lot of situations like that, I tell people to get hired at the company they want using their old skills. Maybe in their sales already, maybe they're in sales, they stay in sales. And then once they're in the company, then they try to transition to the new role they want because then people know them and they're more likely to trust them. The other thing I'll say is that in these challenging times, take care of yourself. Like nothing works without your mind and your body being in good shape. So taking the time to sleep well, eat well, exercise. They seem like basics. They're things we learned to ignore at MIT. And I know I pulled way too many all-nighters at MIT. But if you have a machine that was critical to your efforts, you would take care of it. You make sure it was maintained. And your body and your mind are that fundamental foundation for everything else you do. So don't lose that sight of that in these challenging times, because it's the foundation of everything that you do.
Yeah, and I love that point that both of you bring up, where it kind of really goes back to the person, right? And I think there's also sometimes, and thank you, Eric, especially on your last point about taking care of oneself, right? I find that a lot of times it feels like we're always in this race, right? And so it's like you gotta keep on going, can't slow down. But actually, in looking back on my own career, where the times where I slowed down and really just kind of reflected and not kind of felt like I just needed to get to that next thing like yesterday, tended to be the times when I realized what it is that would be like the best next step for me specifically, rather than what I feel like I should do and so on, right? And like, I think just giving ourselves a permission to also just say, hey, like sometimes like in this environment, that's out of our control of how different hiring can be, right? To just give ourselves some of that grace and give ourselves some space to be okay with not figuring out right away. In fact, this is an opportunity to really look within and try to figure out what it is that we want, because what our assumptions may have been in the past may not necessarily work now. Again, I mentioned earlier, like the only constant is change sometimes. And to your point, I love that, Yan. I think you brought up, think about the things that you really love doing before that you really didn't love doing. And I love that because it's very much so. A lot of times when we look back, we'll find that there are certain themes that are consistent throughout our lives. But there are also things that change in our lives that will, over time, kind of what we like when we just graduated from MIT or, wherever we graduated from, right? Versus later on, right, in life can be quite different. And on that note, actually, I want to pose this question. Well, some people seem to know at least exactly what they want to do. I find that many people are actually not really sure, or they may have based their decisions on what they think others expect of them. So, or maybe what they expect of themselves because of what they heard in the news or seeing other people's career trajectories be, maybe their classmates. So how can someone gain more clarity into what would make the most sense for them?
I'll jump in first on this one. I mean, I'll reinforce the point that Jan made. Like, paying attention to what energizes you and what drains you is one of the best navigation tools you'll have for your career. If in each job you do more of the things that energize you and less of the things that drain you, over time, again, careers are long, you'll definitely get to a place where you're doing a lot of things that energize you, and that matters. I often tell my clients that energizing work is a competitive advantage, because when you do work that you're excited by, that you're energized by, you spend more time on it. You're more excited to do it, and you do better at it. There's a story I often tell where, like, there is, in one of my jobs as a financial analyst, I knew I wasn't great at process and operations. I was like, I need to get better at it. This is one of my weaknesses. I'm going to get better at it by taking a job where that's my whole job. And I dove in and I'm like, okay, I'm going to get better at this. And it was really draining. And I was working 100-hour weeks and I really sucked at it. And I did get better. And I went from like god awful to, below average. And there were people that, were working 40-hour weeks and outperformed me because they loved that work. Their brains worked like that. And it was just like, what am I doing? This is dumb. And instead I learned, let me lean into the things that energize me, but lean into my strengths, paying attention to the things that are actually easy and fun for me to do, and make that the central part of my job. And it turns out when I'm in that kind of zone of genius, then it's like much easier for me. Life goes better. I get better results. And it's like, wait, why was I trying to do things on hard mode? I often say, like, make sure you're doing the right kind of hard. Like, sometimes MIT students love the idea of doing hard things just because they're hard, but that doesn't actually necessarily benefit you. Make sure it's the right kind of hard where it's going to pay off potentially exponentially for you. What do you think, Jan?
I love that, Eric. I think about like a corporate athlete, right? You're like, are you like giving yourself fuel to like continue? Or are you like, doing things to your body that aren't really healthy? So I love that point. And the other point that I think that this inflection point of looking at career or really thinking about it, again, going internally and thinking really about values, like what values are important to you right now in your life, right? And they could be different. For me, I have a young child and my values definitely were different than when I was like 25 and traveling all over the world and having this glamorous life, right? So really think about what your, top 3 values are, 3 or 5 values, and really have that as a lens, as a compass for yourself, because you're right? Your mind can go to like, is it a lot of money? Is it, the status? What are those things that you think you might be pushed towards because, it's society or the things that you like have told yourself versus what do you really want? So I really like the idea of getting closer to your values and looking for a new career with the lens of your values in mind. The other thing is that really holistic life, right? I think sometimes people want these different things in their life, but they never create the environment for it. And they keep wanting it, but they don't create it. So really having that, space and time and pause to like, hey, how do I want my whole life to be, not just my career life?
Yeah, I love that.
Can I just jump in on that? Because that's, I
Go
love,
ahead.
this is one of my favorite things to do. When people say, like, I like ask them to list like what's really important to you, and then you look at their calendar, like, let's see where you actually spend your time. What do you think about that? And it's just they don't match up for most people, and that's just a telltale sign. Like, it's very easy to get caught up in mostly work dominates everything else, especially for high achievers like people that are probably attending this call. And most companies will try to exploit and get as much out of you as they can. So you have to set your own boundaries and figure out how to, you can't wait until you're gonna like, I'll get it, when I get it all done, then I can. Let me tell you, they'll find ways to make sure you never get it all done. I have burned out, don't do that.
And actually, on that note, right, you brought up values. What are some of the examples of values? Because I think, maybe some people know what those might be, but others may not, right? So, Yan, I would love to, Yan and Eric, what are some
Sure.
examples of those values, just so then people, as they're, the attendees, as they're starting to think through what their values are, they can have some, different examples to go off of.
Yeah, and one of the resources I wanted to share as well is Brene Brown has a great values thing. It's on her website. It's totally free that you can go through and look at different values as well. But to give you an idea of some of the values is for me, for example, growth is a big value, right? I want to be able to grow and to make a contribution. So I would look through things in that lens. Flexibility is also a big thing. As a young mother, I wanted flexibility in my job and the autonomy to do certain things. So those are some ideas of the types of values that really matter to me at this stage in my life. Eric, did you want to share?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm not young, but I have young kids. And I had a similar kind of moment where I walked away from Google 3.5 years ago now to start my coaching career. And it was tough. It was really hard because my whole life had been about, I got to get promoted. I got to get to this level. I got to earn more money. And I finally had this really prestigious position at a top company like Google. I was making a lot of money. And I walked away from that to do something that was much more uncertain. I was not going to make the same amount of money, doesn't have the same prestige. And that's a values choice in the end. And, for me, it was like, I want to be there for it was right after my son was born. It's like, I want to be there for my kid. And I won't be able to do that after working 80-hour work weeks for Google. I just won't. And I decided that was worth giving up the money, the prestige, the status. So for me, I chose that family and being present over the status and prestige and the compensation. And that's not easy to do. I mean, I'm still amazed I managed to pull it off 3 years ago. I was fortunate to have a coach at the time who asked me a question. I was like, I can't do it. I have to be a good provider. I have to provide for my family. I can't walk away from this kind of money. What is that going to be? How will I be a good provider for my family? And my coach just looked at me and said, so you're going to be working at a job that you really don't like, that stresses you out just for the money. Is that the example you want to set for your son? I was like, oh, ow. But that helped me pull the trigger.
Yeah, I relate to that too. Actually, I had a very similar thought in my mind. If I'm up doing board presentations and finance decks and things like that, it's going to be really difficult to be present with my child, right? And like you said, Eric, sometimes our corporate structures and different cultures really expect that, right? It's like you can push back as much as you want, but you're also a leader in a corporation. I was like a CFO, so it's like you can't just be like, okay, I'm not going to do it tonight. So you really have to be thinking about all of the things and what you want to be creating for your bigger future.
I love that, and that you bring your personal examples too. So I'm curious, now that you're not necessarily on the other side, you're just continuation of your career, what is it like? Just so that, for people who haven't kind of taken that leap, who wants to take that leap, but feel like they cannot because of all the things that you have mentioned, like there's a prestige, there's some money, there's all these other things. And some things are, non-negotiables at certain points in time. But, what then, what does that life look like for you now?
Great question. Oh, go ahead, Eric. Oh, well, I was just thinking about the prestige too, right? Because I think I really had in my mind, I'm this finance executive. Will I somehow not be because that's not my title anymore? And, some people have this real sort of self-identification with their title. But the reality is I have always had that experience. It's always going to be with me. So it doesn't just go away. And so the way I look at things now is I made a big contribution to companies and organizations, but I still do that. Actually, I do it through an individual now. And it goes back to, what I love doing. I want to help people and I want them to make a big impact. So I have to remind myself, right? I'm not in those fun hotels or those fun, sometimes I get invited to these fun team building events, right? But I have to remind myself again what matters to me and why I created the life I do. And I do enjoy my life. I am able to be really present. And, once in a while I'll have something ticking, but it's not an emergency or a bunch of CEO level people are waiting for something from me. So my life has much more ease in it. I think there's still things that I need to do, like exercise exercise and stuff like that, right? There's always a continuum and maintenance that you have to do. And I think at every level of growth, right, you have some trade-offs. So I think it's being conscious about that and, understanding that you can switch things around as needed. So even for me, I'm like, I'm not that old, right? I could go back to corporate someday if I wanted to. I have a bunch of corporate network people. So also taking this heaviness that like you choose it forever, right? Our lives are really long. And so our dynamic, right? Eric is probably going to be some big executive like consultant again when his kids are older. But that's the thing, right? We have this more autonomy, and our careers are more, fluctuating and can be very different as we think about it. And it doesn't need to be so structured or like a corporate ladder.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess two things. I have a bunch of responses, but I should note that like when I took the leap to leave Google, it wasn't like I was, that good provider thing kind of was not as big a deal as I make it out to be, because my wife is an engineer at Apple. We're going to be fine. But I think the point about really being clear about like what are the trade-offs you're making. You really can't do it all. Like you can't, be totally present for your family and devote everything to work and exercise 10 hours a week and be a volunteer and contribute to your your community or whatever. Like there's just not enough hours in the day. So you're always making choices. What am I going to spend my time doing on honestly a day-to-day and even moment-to-moment basis? So back to Wendy's question, like, what is it like? Like, that's kind of what I try to focus on. Like, how do I use my time in ways that I find meaningful? And, I actually go back to the things I mentioned originally of how I evaluate my job. Like, what am I learning? So one thing I love about my job is I get to learn like constantly. I'm taking classes, I'm reading books, I'm listening to podcasts. Like, this is like heaven for me. I can call it all work because it's all part of me becoming a better coach. What's the impact I'm having? I love working with leaders. I love seeing them take the next step in their careers. I love seeing them break through their own barriers and have more impact. And they're the ones doing the work, but I get to be along for the ride. That's really fun for me. And then the third thing I mentioned was like, who are the people I'm working with? And like the great joy of being self-employed is I choose who I work with. I don't want to work with someone. I just don't work with them. So like right now, I've, along my three axes that I care about, I'm kind of like maxing out all three. And so this is a great job and I'm really satisfied with it. And so far I've been able to make the finances work. But to Jan's point that your career is long, like when I left Google, I had put 2 years of costs into the bank. And I'm like, okay, this is what I have. If I don't have a viable business in 2 years, I have to go back and get a corporate job. And that was like, I'm willing to take the chance. Like I would always wonder if I hadn't taken the chance, what would have been. But this way, I took the chance. And like I said, again, my wife's an engineer. We were going to be fine. And I had the money in the bank. Like it was as low risk a move as you could imagine. And it was still hard. Like that's the funny part. So I had to remind myself, like, if everything goes to hell, like I'll just go get another job. It'll be fine. And I would have learned so much on the journey that it would have been worth it. So that's somebody made the point, I can't remember if it was Jan or Wendy, that like, yeah, sometimes we'll make mistakes and you'll go down a path that isn't quote unquote the right path. And even when you do that, you're going to learn so much from the process. I've had some terrible jobs, jobs where I got fired and jobs where the company went bankrupt. And even those experiences I treasure because I learned so much from going through them.
Yeah, thank you both so much for sharing all of that. And I think, both of you kind of collectively made this point about how, our careers are not this straightforward path. It's just one dimensional or even two dimensional. It's very multidimensional. And given the length of how most of us, and I'm guessing everyone in this room, is planning to have their career and how much they really plan to focus on it, doing things they enjoy, that they will probably ebb and flow into different things. And it's, to Jan's point, you never actually lose those skills that you built from before. You continue to build upon them. Now, having a good story about it is important because, if you just kind of, I know that as an interviewer, but then also just as a coach too, I know that many students, when I ask them, tell me your, students and alums rather, when I ask them, tell me your story, they just start listing chronologically. Here's what I did, here's what I did, here's what I did. And then I'm like, okay, so you're leaving it up to me to kind of figure out what your story is and why you did the things you have done versus, someone who then is able to say, hey, I did this for a while and I really enjoyed this part. I was able to do this, but I realized I discovered that what I really love, what I really wanted to do is this. And therefore I decided, even though it's a hard decision, to make a transition into this area. So for instance, like, a student or alum who is really passionate about climate change, right? It's like, hey, like, I know there's one alum who I know who was in a very very senior role, and then something like, well, I'm not doing anything related to climate change, but I want to move into that field. And it's like they've never lost that part. Even now, there's a lot of opportunities that are coming to her that are also built on what she's done before. So I love this concept of it's a continuity, but make sure you're able to tell that story like you both have. Otherwise, you're leaving it to an employer to figure things out, and they may interpret it not the way you want them to. And so we have some questions. So I want to make sure we get to some of the questions, some that were sent to me directly, and then others that have been asked publicly. So is it okay if we move into some of the Q&A? And I will invite anyone, if you want to speak to, you feel free to send your questions through the chat, but you can also feel free to ask the questions. But I'm going to go ahead and ask two of the questions.